We really appreciate this opportunity to talk about something that I think is on many of our minds, and by the fullness of this room, I sense you're probably all hard at work at something that we've seen as a challenge and an opportunity for us at LinkedIn. This journey of creating gender parity is something that is often seen as a construct of altruism or political correctness. But the reality behind it is that the World Economic Forum tells us that it could take us more than 200 years to reach gender parity globally. That's a pretty long time. I think most of us won't be around for that. So in many ways, we are building for the future, but we're also building around an urgency for the present. And that urgency is symbolized in the fact that it's believed that full representation of women in the global workforce would result in a $28 trillion increase in global GDP. It's easy to say that when women are fully represented, we all win. In addition to that, it's seen that companies that have great performance, and what great performance looks like is gender representation in the top quartile, are likely to outperform their peers by as much as 27% in economic profitability. How many of you would like to work for companies that are economically profitable all the time? I think we all do. So it isn't altruism that leads us to engage in this work. And yet, despite all of the talk about diversity, all of the investments made in diversity and inclusion, we've seen that the progression of women into leadership has been somewhat glacial. Globally, over the last decade, the increase of women in leadership has only been 2%. I don't think most companies would stay in business if they could only grow their bottom line by 2% over a decade. And so the urgency with which we do this at LinkedIn is something we take to heart. Each of us wake up to an amazing vision, a vision to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. And so this conversation about how we create gender parity and create more women in leadership is something we all take seriously. And like many of us, while it's great to hear what others are doing, we have to look at the actions we're taking in our own environment. So I'm going to share a little bit about our process. And Deanne is going to spend some time sharing some research that not only bolsters what we've learned as we've gone through this process, but we hope those insights will help spur you to new actions and new ways of thinking about this challenge. Roughly 5 years ago, which preceded my arrival at LinkedIn, the discussion at the leadership table about how we continue to grow as a business and how we would create economic opportunity for the global workforce turned to who was at the table. What was noted was that LinkedIn's leadership teams were fairly homogeneous. In other words, a lot of men at the table. And as a company, we have a fundamental belief that diverse teams win. But creating an outcome that demonstrated that diversity would require commitment, it would require effort, and it would require consistency to create a new outcome for everyone. So a little bit about what that looked like. In taking a look at the current state in 2014, what we saw was something that's perhaps similar as a theme to what many of your companies may see, that you have a larger representation of women in middle management, and then there's this drop-off for women in leadership. And for us, leadership begins at the director level. What was really fascinating, we could have easily sat back and said 25% isn't so bad. Other companies are at 25%. But why the drop-off? What is it that keeps the numbers from remaining constant? As we began the journey, we recognized we had to ask ourselves a few questions. And in that process, we needed to understand and assess what really was going on. How was company culture, company systems, and dynamics getting in the way of women moving ahead at LinkedIn? We needed to do a little bit of research, not just external research, but clearly understanding in our own environment and hearing from our own employees, how are some of the trends around developing leaders and the trends that would inform the barriers associated with how women grow their careers impacting us? And what were some of the solutions that we could apply that would enable us to think about this opportunity as an opportunity and not as a challenge? Mindset is really important. And if you believe you can't win, there's a good shot you won't. The other part of it is it's really important that as you get ready to implement, the buy-in exists with the leadership of the organization. So as we were developing this plan, soliciting feedback from our employee resource groups, understanding what attrition looked like, understanding what women's aspirations were, and we built a plan to support that. It was really important to ensure that our leaders understood what the end game was, what their actions needed to be, and how we would go about achieving that process. So now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Deanne Tockey, and Deanne's going to walk you through the research we've done at LinkedIn and how that maps to some of the outcomes that we're starting to see. Deanne?
Thanks, Rosanna. My name is Deanne Tockey. I am a program manager on the LinkedIn Talent Solutions Insights team. As part of my role, I get to work every day with LinkedIn's massive data set, powered by our network, to extract actionable insights for our customers to use to build better talent strategies. This year, I had the opportunity to dig into several questions related to gender diversity on our platform, like, do the behaviors and experiences for men and women differ on our platform when it comes to the ways that candidates find jobs or the ways that they're targeted by recruiters? And if so, what can companies that use our platform to build their teams actually do about it? Today, I'll share some of the data and research that came out of our findings, and I'll start with the different ways that men and women use LinkedIn to find jobs. When we set off on this research, we had a lot of hypotheses about the different ways that men and women use LinkedIn. But what quickly stood out to us was not the immediate differences between the ways that men and women use LinkedIn, but rather the similarities that we observed across all candidates, especially in the early stages of the job search process. Starting at the very top of the funnel, the first thing that we looked at was the openness of candidates to new job opportunities. And we saw that for both men and women, candidates are pretty similarly open to new job opportunities, with nearly 90% of candidates indicating that they'd be open to hearing about a new role from a recruiter, regardless of their gender. At the onset of the job seeker journey, when candidates first actively start off on their job search, we also saw a lot of similarities in the ways that men and women want to learn about your company. Regardless of gender, all candidates want to understand what it's like to work at your company before applying to a job there. They want to understand your culture, your mission, and what your company stands for. And both men and women are similarly likely to engage with content that you're posting on your company page, as well as visiting your Life tab to read real stories about real employees. So when it comes to the early steps that job seekers take to evaluate an opportunity, we see in the data that some things are truly universal. Now, where we see the divergence occur between men and women on our platform is actually at the next step of the job seeker journey, the job application stage. We saw that although the data was showing us a lot of similarities in job viewing activity between men and women, women were actually 16% less likely to actually apply to a job after viewing it. And when they did choose to apply, they were doing so at much lower volumes. In total, women applied to around 20% fewer jobs on LinkedIn than their male counterparts. We also saw similar patterns at play when we looked at the likelihood of candidates to proactively tap into their connected networks to ask for a referral on a job. We saw that compared to men, women are actually 26% less likely to ask for a referral on a job that they've applied to, even when they have a connection that works at that company. So there's been a lot of research published about this. I'm sure we've all seen the publication by HP showing that women feel comfortable applying to a job when they meet 100% of a job's qualifications, while men can feel comfortable applying to a job when they meet just 60% of qualifications. And it was eye-opening to see similar patterns to corroborate this in the data that's generated by candidates on our network every day. Now, the good news is, in spite of all these differences, one notable outcome that we observed is that when women do apply to jobs, even though they're doing so less frequently, they're actually 16% more likely to get hired compared to men. And this trend is even more pervasive when we look at the subset of job applications that are being made to stretch roles, so roles that are in a higher seniority level than the job applicant at the time that they apply. When it comes to roles in higher seniority levels, women are even less likely to apply to those roles. But when they do, this number increases to an 18% higher likelihood to get hired. All this data reveals a powerful trend that women are less likely to proactively raise their hand for a new job opportunity, even when they're fully qualified to do so. And that any disparities we see between men and women on our platform aren't a result of female candidates being any less skilled or qualified than their male counterparts, but rather there's self-selection at play that's removing women from the equation for new opportunities, even when they might be the best candidate for the job. After examining the job seeker journey, we then turn to the other side of the equation, so how the recruiting behavior of companies and employers might be contributing to the disparities that we see between men and women on our platform. So we delved into recruiter sourcing activity, and we saw that when recruiters are in the recruiter tool and they're running a search for new candidates, recruiters are actually 13% less likely to click on a woman's profile when she shows up in recruiter search results. Now, those of you who are users of our recruiter tool will be familiar with the limited amount of information that shows up about candidates after you've run a search. Oftentimes, when recruiters are in the tool, they're making snap judgments about which profiles to click on based on nothing more than a candidate's profile picture, their name, and a couple lines about their current and most recent work experiences. However, we also saw that after recruiters do take the time to click on a candidate's profile and read their skills and experiences in more detail, they're actually equally likely to send that candidate outreach about a new role, regardless of their gender. So between this and the job seeker insights we just saw, we start to see this common thread emerge, where women are more likely to get hired for jobs when they apply. They're just not applying as much. And women are just as likely to receive outreach from a recruiter about a new job when their profiles are viewed. They're just not being viewed as much. And it's this common thread of unequal opportunity in the face of equal qualifications that we start to see emerge in the data that's generated on our platform. The last piece of research we'll look at is a study that we published earlier this year in partnership with the International Labor Organization, looking at the gap of women in leadership and the different paths that men and women take to get there. Based on a study across 5 different countries, we saw the same pattern emerge in every country, showing us that women on average are actually reaching leadership roles 1.4 years earlier in their careers compared to men. The problem is that so few women are actually making it there. In the US today, there's nearly 2 male leaders for every woman in a leadership position. In Norway, a country widely considered by the World Economic Forum to be the country with the lowest overall gender gap in the country today, we also see a similar 2-to-1 ratio of male to female leaders. And in countries like India, not even 1 in 5 leaders in the workforce today are women. These findings echo a theme that women have a much smaller window of opportunity to reach leadership positions. And if a woman doesn't reach her first role in leadership early on in her career, her likelihood of doing so continues to decline throughout her career and plummets the longer that she's in the workforce. So with all of this research in our hands, we started to ask the next obvious question: why? How much of this disparity can we actually attribute to job seeker self-selection, or recruiter unconscious bias, or even socioeconomic factors like the increased likelihood for women to leave the workforce right around the time in their careers when most professionals are progressing most rapidly into leadership roles? So we turned to external research on the topic, like this study published by KPMG on self-advocacy, showing that 56% of women that they surveyed had indicated that they aspired to reach senior leadership roles at their company, but they felt more cautious about taking tangible steps to get there. Or this study, published earlier this year by the Harvard Business Review, citing the sponsorship gap as a key barrier to advancement for female leaders, showing that less than 40% of women have had a conversation about their career with a sponsor or a mentor in the last 2 years. So the amount of research and publications out there on this topic can feel seemingly endless sometimes, all pointing to the conclusion that yes, while there is a problem, we've yet to really crack it in a definitive way. But all of this data and research is only as meaningful as the actions that they drive. So we turned our focus to the small steps that anyone can take to put this data and put these insights to work at your company to help push for better gender balance. So what can you do today with these insights to drive a better diversity strategy at your company? Knowing that women are more likely to self-select out of the job application process, make sure you're using inclusive and non-gendered language in your job descriptions and recruiter outreach to help mitigate for this. Knowing that women are less likely to proactively ask for a referral and that recruiter unconscious bias is most pervasive before candidates even make it into your pipeline, make sure you're diversifying your sources of hire just as much as you're hoping to diversify your workforce. Use data to uncover non-traditional sources of hire for talent that you're trying to hire with higher levels of gender diversity for the skill sets that you need. And make sure that your pipeline represents a healthy blend of referrals, job applicants, and sourced candidates. And finally, I work on the insights team, so I'll be a bit biased towards this category. I believe that the most important step to instituting any meaningful change is to start with the data. Quantify your starting point and your opportunity. Set yourself measurable goals and track your progress regularly to identify what's working and what's not. From understanding what your company's current gender balance looks like and how it compares to your industry peers, which, by the way, if you haven't accessed this yet, we're giving out in Custom Insights Report in the plan area of the in-lounge outside, to also tracking how your job descriptions and your recruiter outreach perform with male and female candidates, there are actionable steps that you can take today to infuse data throughout every step of your talent strategy and to use insights to strengthen your push for better gender balance at your company. So I'll turn it back to Rosanna now to bring us back to LinkedIn's story and the steps we took to apply insights like this to our own diversity strategy.
Thanks, Deanne. A little bit about LinkedIn's strategy to share with you how our process has mirrored much of what Deanne has concluded. For one, we recognize that in order to build a strategy that would be successful, we needed to leverage what had already been successful in the work of grassroots ERGs at LinkedIn over the first few years. And we wanted to galvanize the energy that already was being exhibited by employees and their commitment to creating an environment that was more diverse, more inclusive, and where people could genuinely get the sense of belonging from the moment they joined the company. So we knew an important part of this work would be how we not only go to market to identify talent pools and hire those talent pools, but how we would grow that talent. An important component about the environment, the ecosystem that our employees work in is really how managers address diversity, how managers engage with their employees, and how we get leaders and managers comfortable around topics that sometimes aren't so comfortable. And so this invest process looks very much like not only how do we scale up managers to have courageous conversations, but how do we build the allyship among peers as well, so that it's an environment where diverse talent can trust and thrive. And then culture becomes a really important phenomena that we all experience. It's not just the culture of our company, but in this case more so the culture that LinkedIn evokes as a result of the products that we have. How to make sure that members feel safe on the platform, how to ensure that in the tech industry we can vanquish narratives about women and people of color not feeling that they can belong, and how do we create an environment that really enables communities to come together and support each other in developing and growing in this industry. To give you some real-time examples around hire, like many of you, we chose to adopt a Rooney Rule-based philosophy. And the idea here is if you aren't creating diversity in the slates with which you're bringing talent in, it's not likely that you're going to be able to change the composition of your workforce. So we made sure to include women as we were considering opportunities to hire and opportunities to promote. It was important to train our recruiting teams and to train hiring managers so that it's not only a shared objective, but it doesn't live as a quota. The idea of creating diversity is not about quotas that are targets, but rather how do you create sustainable progress for your organization and close the gap and sustain the engagement of your talent over time. The importance of career development was really a prominent part of the philosophy over the years, and it continues to be for us. And we exhibit that largely by creating cohort programs that encourage the creation of communities, support systems that enable women to not feel like they're the only ones, to be able to engage in conversations with peers so that the experience or feeling of imposter syndrome can be vanquished, because we know how great you really are. And sometimes you need someone to hold that mirror up for you. The programs were focused on skills development, mentoring, sponsorship. All of the things that we heard Deanne say become necessary to create an environment where opportunity becomes real and attainable. And I would love to underscore the following. For all of those things, what's most created is a sense of inspiration that galvanizes the women in our environment. As you see, high potential, high performing women begin to truly believe the next role and the next level is attainable, and the results are demonstrating and consistent with attaining that next level. The invest focus that we have around manager enablement really is about how are you creating a conversation in all of those processes that managers engage in. From who we need to hire next, to who we identify for stretch assignments and promotions. And an important notion when we think about stretch assignments, whether it's the individual who's leading an employee resource group or the individual who's a really good team player, it's not a stretch assignment if you have a woman doing homework at work. What I mean by that is women who are coordinating the baby showers or coordinating the celebrations that take place in the environment. If that's happening on your teams, what you're doing is perpetuating some of the same challenges. And we began to note that the spirit of contribution has to be better balanced as well. So stretch assignments become meaningful stretches. It's the revisit of who gets the next opportunity, who's that go-to person, and how do you ensure the distribution of opportunity and challenge in equal measure. For our managers, that required embarking on a journey of self-awareness. It's not just the unconscious bias, it's the recognizing of patterns that you might exist in when you're making decisions about people. And how do you rewrite the code on that pattern so that you're distributing opportunity more equitably? In the last year, you may have heard about our announcement to ensure that we're incorporating diversity by design into our products. And what that means is being very intentional not only in how we're designing products that are supportive of all talent, but how do we ensure to turn an added lens to understand whether in fact we're creating adverse impact. More specifically, we look at things like representative results, the ability to do a search for a particular role, and if that role has an equal balance of men and women, when you run that search, you will see that same equal balance distribution based on the criteria and the qualifications you're seeking. Now, it may not seem like a big thing, but I'm a recovering TA professional, and sometimes there are moments when you're conducting a search and it's easier to go to the first 3 pages and forget the rest. Well, sometimes if you go through all of the pages, you'll find gold throughout, and we want to make sure that gold is equally represented. An effective DIB strategy for our organization means that we're looking at the full employee life cycle. It starts before the hire is made, and it continues through the experience of the employee. It's the opportunity to not only attract talent, but to really promote an amazing brand. And I think we all want to have an amazing and inclusive brand that signals to future talent and current talent, that you're not only welcomed, valued, and appreciated, but you can be successful here as well. We know that the hiring process has to be unfair and biased. So in addition to tactics like Rooney Rule, ensuring that you have a diverse panel of interviewers in the slate. If you don't have representation of diverse people on the team, inviting other members of the organization to be a part of that conversation so that you're noting things that that future talent, that future hire might actually be interested in isn't a bad idea. It's one of the ways in which we've been able to use resource groups to create that sense of community, to have candid conversations about experiences in the environment, to share what's being done to ensure that everyone feels at home. And certainly, nurturing your talent is really important. You know, all too frequently, I've heard people say, it's easier to find a job outside of my company than it is to find the next step in my company. It's important that we know who's in our workforce. It's important to understand what the needs of people who may represent underrepresented populations like Black or Latino might actually require in order to be successful. And sometimes what's required more than anything is someone who cares. It requires someone who makes note of including that person not just in meetings, but in social activities that are taking place, or that person who invites you to lunch so that you're not eating alone when you're a new hire. And it's really important that we celebrate successes as well. An important tenet that we've seen in diversity and that we hear from our ERGs is it's really hard to imagine growing in an organization when they can't see themselves in leadership. And so it's incumbent upon us not just to recruit diverse talent, but ensure that diverse talent thrives. So what does LinkedIn look like today for women? Really proud to say that 4 years ago, where we were at 25% women in leadership, we are now beyond 39% women in leadership, and sustainably growing. And I say sustainably because it's not just representation today, it's looking at the pipeline that's already in the organization. It's looking at how the women in leadership are engaging with the next generation of women and emerging leaders, and how men in leadership are engaging with that next generation of women in leadership. It is bringing that nurture strategy to life to recognize that as we continue to grow, we reflect more of our member base, more of our customer base, and we'll be better prepared to perform and outperform in the future as well. Now, I could easily take the victory lap because I can say that we are among the leaders in tech in representation of women in leadership, but I also can say to you, we haven't made enough progress in other areas. There's more work ahead for us in relation to how we create leadership that represents Black and Latino talent in our organization, and how we look at other underrepresented populations strategically to be able to create working solutions and working practices that enable us to not only attract talent, but grow that talent in the same numbers we've created with women. I think we're well on our way. I think success breeds the hunger for more. And I know that we're not alone in this because you're each working at this. As we look to the future, I invite each of you to think about how we do this together. What can we learn from each other? What can we share with each other? How do we continue to encourage each other? Certainly, we're happy to do so, and we've been fortunate that as we've been more successful at this, it makes us more innovative, more creative, and we know that many of you are doing this and finding success as well. Let's share those successes. Let's challenge each other. Let's support each other, and let's celebrate the wins, however small, because they encourage us to keep moving forward. And I believe it won't be very long before we see gender parity in all of our organizations. So with that, I'd like to invite you to the microphones that we have. Deanne's going to come and join me up here on stage, and we'd be really happy to take your questions, hear your thoughts, get your perspectives.
you ready for the question?
Ready for you.
Hi.
Hi.
This is Pooja. Great presentation and amazing progress, so congratulations. The question I have is, what were some of the challenges that you had as you were making this progress in this journey? I'm sure there were internal and external challenges, and how did you overcome them?
Thank you, Pooja. There are always challenges. So, first challenge, sometimes it feels like the needle isn't moving quickly enough. So while we've continued to make progress across the organization, there are some parts of the organization where we started at a much lower threshold, and that's in our engineering and tech-oriented functions. So like many of you, the challenge of women in tech is a persistent one, and while we've improved there, we haven't improved as rapidly as we have across other parts of the organization. The second is a fast-growing company means you have new people coming into the organization all the time, new recruiters coming into the organization all the time. You've got to make sure not to weaken the muscle of onboarding people, not only with the philosophy and the culture and behaviors the company expects, but with the training, the skills. We don't all come from environments that have thought this way or skilled us up to do this. And so as we look at the practice of talent acquisition, we have to continue to reinforce and retrain that muscle with new talent that comes into the organization. And then the third is a willingness to revisit practices. I shared earlier, we're currently revisiting our Rooney Rule approach. And sometimes there's an opportunity to lean in and be a little more deliberate and a little more intentional, and you can optimize for different results. So continuously analyzing and understanding not only where we are from a representation standpoint, but through our employee engagement, understanding how women feel about the environment, understanding where they're feeling a sense of encouragement, and where there might be a persistence around either discouraging or a sense of lack of opportunity. It requires us to maintain and renew that focus so that we don't get, quite frankly, weaker or lose attention on something that is so important for us. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm with a tech startup out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And one of our problems is something you talked about, which is having females on interview panels, specifically in tech. So we have very few females. So those females that we are using get really overused and then end up feeling like the token female. So how do you combat that and keep them involved so candidates get a good experience, but you're not burning them out?
Hi, that's a really great question. I think the burnout can be real, and it's important to recognize when employees are being utilized in ways where perhaps they're expected to do more of something than their peers might. So first, how do you make sure you're recognizing and rewarding people for that extra effort? Because that's not discretionary, that's kind of command performance on behalf of the organization as an ambassador. Second, help men learn the language of allyship. An important part of the process and journey that we've had is how to create a shared language around this. I think most men want to help. They're not often sure how to. Even the term allyship can invoke certain questions like, what is an ally really? What do I need to do to demonstrate that? And so in an ideal world, we don't have to deal with the imbalance in representation. But because it's real, how do we empower and make that a responsibility for men to address as well, so that every candidate is going to have a view of how this company operates and how the commitment to women is real and top of mind for all leaders.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting this. My name is Ruchi. I'm from Unum Group. We're an insurance company. And my question is more around manager enablement that you had a slide about. I feel like we have a lot of success when it comes to conversations and diversity recruiting at the leadership level. Where we really struggle is more that entry level up to mid-management, because hiring for them is probably 5% of their day-to-day activities. And what type of tools do you have that keep managers sort of forefront in that hiring practice? Are there any SLAs, anything that's tied to their performance, anything that holds them accountable? Because we feel like we've held our TA teams or sourcers, HR accountable for those facts, but just trying to fill those high volume roles up to mid-management, it's hard getting managers bought into that practice.
Sure. I'll tackle this, and perhaps Deanne has something she'll want to add to this from her research and the insights we've seen. So for the last 2 years, diversity, inclusion, and belonging has been the number one operating priority, the number one talent priority, rather, at LinkedIn, where talent is our number one operating priority. So there's been a consistent focus across the organization. It's not just talk, it's an alignment in the aspirational goals we've set for the organization and how we continue to cascade this thinking to our leaders. A couple of things that we've done that are, in part, how do you embolden the ecosystem, the environment? And one is, how do you help catch managers and reinforce not only the right thinking and the right mindset around this, but even an awareness and understanding of how to address these things. So we've invested heavily in training our HR business partners in this conversation for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Because it may be true for some of you, I know that I've seen this in other organizations, that when a challenge comes up that we characterize as diversity, we'll often pick up the phone and call whoever is leading diversity to come and help us out. And I hear a couple of giggles on that, but the reality is diversity is everyone's responsibility, not just some. We also know that what's often termed the frozen middle, those middle managers and frontline managers are often overwhelmed with the work they do on a day-to-day basis. They don't even quite know how to go about this. So you have to think about what works in your culture. How is information messaged? What do OKRs look like for your organization? How is this a conversation that isn't happening once a quarter or once a year, but is happening on a regular basis when you're discussing succession planning, talent review, calibration? If you're looking at stretch assignments for individuals, certainly in a regular feedback loop or process, how is that conversation coming up between a leader and a people manager who's a direct report, as opposed to we discuss everything about the business and we talk about your people, but we don't talk about what you're doing to create a more diverse and inclusive team. So there is a consistency that has to exist not only in the discussion, but then in the actions and certainly the behaviors that align with that. And I will tell you, it doesn't happen overnight, which is why there has to be not only constancy and patience to it, but every day another step in the same direction. There are leaders and managers who don't sign on, and they want to wait it out. And if they take no action, in some cases they win. But if the expectation is set and the alignment to the business objectives are there, the progress then gets measured. And something that Deanne pointed out is the importance of measuring. And that's where we're able to then hold leaders accountable to actions taken, lack of actions taken, results achieved, lack of results achieved. Deanne, anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think two things came to mind when you were asking your question. I think the first is bringing us back to the stat that we looked at about how women are less likely to raise their hands for new opportunities, primarily stretch opportunities that might be outside of the realm of where they currently stand. I think to the extent that you can, making your managers aware of this phenomenon and making sure that the way that Rosanna underscored a lot, the importance of making stretch opportunities available for everyone and making sure that managers are aware of the extra push that they might be required to put this on the radar for some of their female employees that they might not have previously considered for that role. I think the other piece that comes to mind is going back to the stat about how we saw in our studies that women on average tend to reach their first leadership positions sooner than men. I don't know about you guys, but when we first saw that, that was a bit of an eye-opener for us. It goes so contrary to so many of the research and publications that we've seen that talks at length about how women have a longer and tougher road ahead of them to reach leadership positions and to progress in their careers. And when we were thinking about that, one hypothesis that came to mind for us was maybe the qualifications and the criteria that women are being held to when it comes to being evaluated for these leadership roles is so much more stringent that only the best are making it through. So to us, what that flagged was a little bit of an unequal evaluation process for men and women based on either their confidence, their skills, their experiences. So again, being able to flag that process with your managers, making them aware of having similar and consistent evaluation criteria for everyone on their team, primarily for stretch roles, are kind of two areas that I would highlight.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi there.
Hi, my name's Nicole. I work for a growing startup that's predominantly men. And it really clicked with me when you said this isn't a quota. I feel like a lot of times that I'm talking to my hiring managers, it's very analytical, and it is about we need to get X number because we need to have X number, not really thinking about we need to have like thought differential and things like that. So how do I flip the script and help them understand it's more than just having women to say you have women?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Nicole. I think many of us know that there are parts of our environment that are more cerebral, there are parts of our environment that are more compassionate, and there are parts of our environment that just want to do. And so you have to be able to calculate which part you're communicating to an environment like that. For many organizations, the challenge is in the business case. And that business case, I think, is pretty well documented at this point, whether it's research that's been done by McKinsey or Deloitte, some of the research that I cited from the World Economic Forum that tells us that companies that have greater gender diversity outperform. And so if they're cerebral, making sure that they have access to that case, glad to share some of those links with you. I think many of you may already be familiar with it. I think the other part to it, and I think it's important in relation to what you said, diversity is not only about gender, it's about experiences and it's about backgrounds. And one of the things that we see here at LinkedIn is that we are often most comfortable hiring the people we know. The challenge with only hiring the people we know, as you heard from Jeff, is that we preclude opportunities for people who are equally and sometimes even more qualified, but don't necessarily have the same background represented or the same experiences represented. And so curiosity in leaders is a necessary factor, and what we've learned is in the language that we use with what we expect of leaders and managers and the behaviors that we encourage them to have, there's a way to coach managers to be more effective around how they challenge their own convictions, their own practices, and their own behaviors. Those are two ways that I think may be an opportunity. The third, what's the competition doing? So often that aspiration that a company may have may be the aspiration based on the benchmarks you are using around workforce representation. And if another company in your industry is outperforming or demonstrating really good results, and they're also demonstrating a commitment to diversity, often that can be a motivator or a prompter. So a little competition's never a bad thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One more question? Hi.
Hi, my name is Andy. I was just wondering, in the data that was presented, if you did a deeper dive around race and ethnicity, if there's any difference between the men and women.
Thanks for the question, Andy. Yes, so as a part of our ongoing work, we deconstruct a lot of our workforce data to have a better understanding of the experiences of our employees, because it's not just about diversity and inclusion, belonging is really important. So while we are looking at representation in the workforce at different levels across business functions, we're also looking at attrition, we're looking at employee engagement results to better understand. In some cases, we'll see parallels, but sometimes that really is relative to a particular function. And in some cases, what we see is that underrepresented groups have different concerns even than women might have. So, as someone who practices this work, you have to look at all of the angles and the intersections, because you might, in some cases, see it's not just a differential between race and gender, it may be a difference between gender within race as well.
Another thing I can add to that We're currently in the process of working to improve our ability to pull similar insights and research across race and ethnicity and other diversity facets beyond just gender. Another thing we recognize is that you probably noticed all of the gender insights that I presented were cut very starkly between men and women. We recognize that not all members fall on this binary identification of gender. So we're working to increase the options that our members have to self-identify how they identify themselves, both across gender as well as race and ethnicity, which we currently don't have in our research. We're in the process of rolling out this ability for members to be able to have more of a say on the way that they identify themselves from a diversity perspective. And when we have enough of a critical mass of that sample size collected in our data set, we're excited to dive into that in the future.
We want to thank you so much for your attention and your time today.